This is the Incongruous channel, and I'm Dr. Andy Yates. And normally I'd be speaking about the show I did on Beetroot Radio, website at the bottom of the page here, that I did on Saturday. But because of events last week, I just kind of felt I had to say something. So I did spend at the beginning of that show, which was on the climate, and not climate change specifically, but all about different ideas about why we've got different climates and that sort of thing. But I did spend 10 to 15 minutes just chatting about what all happened in this country last week. And so that's what I want to do here. Just talk about that rather than the show. Now, I did do a show which is called EU, UK, USA Trade Deal. I say a show, a YouTube video. And I'll be honest, I nailed it. I was absolutely, I think, on target with that show because I was almost predicting events that are going to come, I think, one way or the other. And they scare me, to be honest, because the future of the UK is in a Toff government's hands. But before I get into that, let me tell you a story. Now, you may know that I lived in the United States for over 20 years and I moved back to the UK in 2017. And one of the things that happened as I lived longer and longer in the United States was I started to develop allergies, right? Obviously, my immune system was being compromised by something. And I'd always thought, and I still do, that it was because of additives in the food, in the water, in the drinks you'd have, in the atmosphere. It was just poison, right? A toxic environment that gradually drags down your immune system. I mean, it could have been Shiwa Bade, maybe poisoning me over a long time, but I'm still here. So she didn't do much of a job of it. There you go. But the thing is, the worst part of it was I developed a thing called pomphilosis, dyshydrotic eczema on my hands. And without going into too much detail, it get blisters, it would run, it would drip, it would dry, it would crack, it would split, it would bleed. So much to the point that sometimes, because I was working in an office environment, I would have to wear examination gloves so I didn't bleed on the paperwork. That's how bad it got. And I lost my fingerprints, which wasn't very helpful as I was going through the immigration process in the United States. Not very helpful at all. However, here's the thing. I moved back to the UK, so I'm drinking the UK's water, I'm drinking UK beer, if you like, eating UK food, UK atmosphere, UK environment, and 2 months, it all went away and has never come back. And my hands? Nice little pink things here. You might be able to see, probably not, that in fact, I still don't have any fingerprints, but I'm okay because I can use these to dig the garden and do the regular things you could do that I would always have to put multiple levels of gloves on for. And I don't want that poison in this country affecting me because I've had the effects and affecting you because you're my friends. You're the British people and you're my friends. So it worries me a bit, right? And as I said in that show, what I'm worried about is that if there's a chance for a quick buck here, a little bit of profit and so on and so forth, if we take some kind of dodgy kind of practices, if we accept a trade deal from the United States, which insists on us accepting their poison food, well, we can have our poison food. We won't be able to sell our poison food if it's genetically modified, right, to the EU, but we will be able to sell it all around the world. Now, Boris Johnson's the new Prime Minister, and I honestly wish him the best of luck of making Great Britain better for me and you, the common people, the great unwashed, the useless eaters. Not for him and his buddies and his Oxford University pals, right? Not for that rich upper class elite, but for us. Because we're the people who hold the power, should hold the power, in this democratic government and country, right? But something he said in a speech, and when I heard him say it, his first speech, his first address to the House of Commons as Prime Minister. Now, you'd think within that statement that he made that whatever was in there was going to be really important because it was written down. The rest of the time it's freebasing and he's answering questions. It's Prime Minister's question time. But he started with a statement, which was pre-prepared. So whatever's in there, you'd think, wouldn't you, that that would be pretty important to get that message across. Let me quote you what he said. I got it right here. He said, we would have a bioscience section liberated from anti-genetic modification rules, and we would also have blight-resistant crops. Now, I assumed, incorrectly, that blight-resistant crops meant using stuff like glyphosate, Roundup, right? Not quite correct, because my immediate thought was, oh, this is how he prepares for the American trade deal. By changing the rules in this country after we've left the EU so that it would allow us to allow those kind of things in, genetically modified products in. And so that's what I thought. But in fact, he mentioned blight-resistant crops and blight-resistant crops. I mean, you know what blight is, right? It's a kind of a weird, I don't know what it is, a fungally thing. I don't know. But it's a terrible thing. In the 1850s, that was the cause of the Great Irish Potato Famine, which is a terrible time. Lots of people died. Awful, awful, awful. We would never want anything like that to happen again. So that's important, blight. But if we concentrate perhaps on the blight-resistant potatoes, right? Blight-resistant potatoes, do they have to be genetically modified? No. No, they don't. There are plenty of naturally blight-resistant edible potatoes. So do you have to get a blight-resistant non-edible potato and a blight-sensitive potato and take a strand of DNA out of this one and drop it into this one, right? You get the idea? And put them together and hope that you only get the gene or the piece of DNA or whatever it is. I don't really understand this stuff terribly well. Only that little bit that is to do with blight resistance. If you can hear a bit of noise, it's because it's raining right now, which is good for the garden, right? But what happens if you bring over something else? Now, one of the things that research has shown is there is a chance to transfer through genetic modification, DNA, from plant to bacteria. And if you transfer something like antibiotic resistance from plant to bacteria, and then we eat it, because when we do that scientific transfer from the non-edible, the blight resistant, to the blight sensitive, right? But in our gut, when we eat that potato, our gut is a very good environment to do a transfer of DNA. And the problem with that transfer is one of the ones they found is antibiotic resistant, causes bacteria to become antibiotic resistant. Now, a lot of things are antibiotic resistant these days because of our overuse of antibiotics, but one of the big ones that we've pretty much eradicated from our civilized world anyway is tuberculosis. And that's one that is dealt with very well by antibiotics. And personally, I don't really want that, especially when there's an alternative. Because you've got to ask the question, so why is there this big push? Why has Boris Johnson actually said in that speech, we're going to be liberated, as if this is the wonderful panacea that's going to save our country? I don't think it will. And what I said in my previous show, my previous YouTube video, was, do we trust these people not to do it just to make a profit and then run. And I think I said, go and live in the Cayman Islands along with Richard Branson, right? Do we trust them? Is that what they're doing? Are they really doing it for the good of the people? That people like me who will get allergies and stuff like this from the potential problems with GMOs are just collateral damage, and there's not many of us, and it's not so bad, and it'll be okay. Look at the good it's done for the country. Because you got to know that people say the GDP of this country is 5%, but there's another number related to GDP. And that's GDP using PPP, which is per person percentage or something like that. On one, we're 5th in the world. On the other one, we're 23rd in the world. And why is there a difference between those two numbers? Because the country is making just the same amount of money, or the money's flowing through the country to make us 5th on one scale. But when you add the people in and see how much money is actually getting down to the people, we're 23rd. That's a little bit thought-provoking, isn't it? So if we improve the businesses in this country, if we improve the farming, if we improve the crops and everything with a slight collateral damage, is it going to benefit us, or is it going to benefit the 1% of the 1%, the upper class elites, rich upper class elites? What do you think? What do you think? That's all I'm asking. What do you think? Stimulate your mind to think along this process and say, oh my goodness, because we have what I've heard referred to as a Toff government. So it's almost like we've got another kind of aristocracy there now. And I thought the idea was that the House of Commons was for common people to represent the people, the common people of this country. But it does rather seem that we have this like little separate kind of royalty up there now. Especially as the Prime Minister is got a genealogical line to the throne, I think. It's a long way away, but he's got it. So, what do you think? This is the point. What do you think? Because the problem with GMOs are, if you come out with a new GMO and you make this hybrid potato that's blight resistant and everything like this, long-term testing? Because that's the problem with my hands. They didn't happen immediately. 20 years it took. The slow poisoning over time, dragging down my immune system, challenging on a daily basis my immune system. And of course, if you overwork the immune system, which is there to protect you against disease and pathogens, right? If you overwork that, it can't stop some of those things. And some of the really nasty ones are things I mentioned, tuberculosis and cancer. Because I've heard it said that we all have cancer cells in our body. The reason they don't get us is our immune system takes care of it. But if you're constantly challenging that immune system by having these additions into our food supply, makes us open to disease, doesn't it? And that's collateral damage because, hey, look at the money we're making, us people up at the top. Got to wonder about it, haven't you? Got to wonder about it. And as I said, Boris Johnson's statement was very clear. Oh, this is the way we're going to go. This is our focus, where we're going to go. This is our ideas that we've got to make our country great again. And that will be a slight collateral damage. I don't know. What do you think? You think I'm crazy? You think I'm a conspiracy theorist? Kind of not really. I'm interested in conspiracy theory. And I don't think this is a conspiracy because if you listen to my show that I did 4 weeks ago, EU, US, UK trade deal, on the YouTube channel, this Incongruous channel, you will see and hear that I kind of nailed it. And said, this is what I'm worried about. This is what I'm worried about will happen. And here it is. And just another little bit. So, number one, we have genetically modified food starting to come much more into our world. That is going to take a while because at the moment, EU law is UK law. So when we leave the EU proper, we actually leave on that particular date, we still are subject to those same laws. What they would have to do is change the laws through a parliamentary process, and we know how efficient Parliament's been with the Brexit process, so that may take a while, and people may not let those votes go through, right? Because just because the Prime Minister says it doesn't make it happen. It's still got to go through the parliamentary process, still got to be written into law, and changing the law that's already there now. And then it'll take a time for it to get downstream and all that kind of thing. And as far as the US-UK deal, that could take up to 10 years before we've negotiated back and forth and stuff like this. But from their initial document, the USA is saying, if we have a deal with you, we also want to have some measure of control over who you trade with. And basically what we're doing is saying we don't want to be controlled by the EU, but we're going to give that control to the US. I hope not. I hope better people, smarter people will look at this, see the pitfalls, see the dangers, and say, no, we ain't going there. And in the meantime, my hands are going to remain lovely and pink and healthy. And that would be good, because I wouldn't want that to happen to you, my friends. Okay? So, the radio show I did on Saturday is at the website you can see below, dr.eddieyates.com. That is then compressed as a podcast, as I said, on that website. This is my little thought dump on the show that I've done, just on those comments, because I thought this is very important for me to say this, very important for the British people, all of that. Beware is all I'm saying. Don't be scared, but beware. Be careful. Be careful who you vote for, because we've got an election coming up sometime soon. Even though people say, oh, no, we're not going to have an election, da, 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 da. I think we have. The government only has a majority of 2, and I think that's going to fall to 1. And if they don't have a majority, that then, I think, spurs the process to have an election, because they will need to make a new deal with some other party to make up the numbers or whatever. That's the way it works. They've got to be in the majority to actually form the government with the permission of the Queen, who always says yes, right? So there's a chance we can say, you know, hey, I'm going to decide what we want to happen to this country by my vote. Do we want to give up all these environmental protections that Michael Gove, our new Deputy Prime Minister, has been saying we were going to keep all the way along, until he was totally contradicted by his boss, the Prime Minister, last week? It's a mess, isn't it? Always going to be a mess. But let's see what happens, because getting out of the Brexit thing, getting out of the EU isn't going to be easy. And then there's going to be all the subsequent issues, recoil, whatever, trade problems, this and that. And then we have to go to the EU and negotiate with them how we trade with them now in the future. Because remember, 50% of our trades with the EU, 15% of our trades with the US. So having a big, good trade deal with the US isn't going to, you know, deal with any kind of major loss for our trade with the EU. So we still have to trade with the EU. We got to work out what basis we do that on. Do we check everybody in? Do we check everybody out? Anyway, but my main point is we got to be careful of these GMOs, because they're not long-term tested. They're subtle, continuous poisoning effects, if they are there, aren't easy to test. And I got to be honest with you, looking at what I'm hearing, I don't think they will be tested. Better to make the money and worry about the consequences down the road, because they may not even be in government anymore. That's the way it works. Okay. This is the Incongruous channel. I'm Dr. Andy Yates. Thanks for listening. And please, take care.